My sister crashed into a Bugatti. The damage was assessed at 130 million. The owner was the most untouchable heiress in the capital, Miss Pei. I bit the bullet and went to negotiate a payment plan with her. For this damage assessment, can I pay it back in installments? She leaned back on the sofa and stared at me for 10 seconds. Her red lips curved slightly. Pay me back with yourself. Latter, I became her fake boyfriend to ward off unwanted suitors. She cleared my debts and settled my troubles, and even helped transfer me to the music department I had always dreamed of. I only had one job to do: pretend to be in love with her. On the day I went to the national violin competition with Pei Yanran, I sat in the audience. She won the gold prize. Instead of celebrating with her coach first, she went backstage to change into a white bridal gown, rushed through the crowd and threw herself into my arms. She pulled out a pair of rings she had prepared long ago. Chen, will you marry me? The entire crowd erupted in screams. That pair of rings cost 410 million. But that very night, her mother sent people to force her onto a flight to the UK. At the airport, I watched her through the glass with a heavy heart. She looked back at me with eyes full of deep affection and said her final words: "Wait for me to come back." 5 years later, on the streets of London, an elegant and stunning woman stood in front of a giant screen. The screen prominently displayed photos of me from over the years. 5 years, I went from being an ordinary guy buried in debt to standing at the center of the international stage, relying on my musical talent. A young Chinese woman walked up and asked, "Excuse me, is he your idol?" The woman didn't move. Her voice was cool and resolute. "My husband." On the other side, my assistant Tang Chu howled with excitement. "Chen, we just got another invitation for a private performance." He was as thrilled as a giant kid. I let out a helpless laugh. "It is just a private show, isn't it? No need to get this excited." Tang Chu leaned in closer, looking very mysterious, and lowered his voice to say, "This time is different. Guess how much they're offering?" A private show of mine usually goes for about 500,000. Seeing how hyped he was, I took a tentative guess. 8,000 ding. He shook his head wildly. No. Guess higher. Even higher than 800,000? Who is the big spender? 1,000,000? Tang Chu pouted again. Still higher. A lot higher. This was getting completely unrealistic. Now I was on my guard. This high. Is this some kind of job scam? It is not some high-paying trap to lure me to Myanmar to harvest my organs, is it? We're not taking this. My life is more important. Tang Chu was amused by my words. He patted his chest to reassure me. What are you thinking? The show is domestic, right here in capital city. I heard it is for a young lady who just returned from the UK. I immediately grew curious. Do you know who she is? No. They're keeping it pretty mysterious. All I know is her last name is Pei. Pei. That last name made my heart skip a beat, as if something deep in my mind had been triggered. Oh right, she requested the song Old Dream. Old Dream. Why did those seem to exist in my memories? It felt so familiar. I frowned deeply, yet I couldn't grasp that memory at all, as if it were sealed in the deepest part of my brain. Just as I was trying hard to remember, Tang Chu suddenly blurted out an astonishing figure: 5.2 million. This symbolism, it is practically a blatant declaration of, "I love you," going for something so romantic. Does she have a crush on you, Chen? Who is this deeply infatuated woman? Who is this woman secretly in love with our President Jiang? I snapped out of it, glanced at him, saying casually, "You're overthinking it." The venue for the private performance was the Molan Mansion in Beijing's most exclusive luxury district. The client sent a Rolls-Royce Phantom to pick us up. Tang Chu's eyes went wide with awe. Holy crap, is this how an heiress rolls? This is insane. Would it really hurt this world? To make me rich too, would it? I couldn't help but chuckle. "I'll give you a raise this month." The moment I said this, Tang Chu instantly squealed, "You're the best, President Jiang." The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided smoothly along, driving straight into the Molan Mansion grounds, and stopping in front of an extremely vast, seemingly endless luxury estate. The ultimate opulence of the decor, where every single detail screamed old money, made even me marvel in my heart. Who on earth was this heiress, to actually be this incredibly wealthy? The butler and servants were waiting respectfully at the entrance of the estate. "Mr. Jiang, this way please." I nodded slightly, a strange premonition bubbling up inside me. Upon entering the estate, the butler led me to the dressing room. A servant handed me an outfit. I looked up and saw that it was actually a traditional Chinese outfit in the Han-Tang style. "Please change your clothes first. Someone will be here shortly to do your hair and styling." "Okay, thank you," I replied politely. I quickly changed into the stage costume. Surprisingly, it fit perfectly. It was as if it had been custom made for me. Once I was dressed, the stylist began working on my hair. After about 20 minutes, I was completely ready. The butler led me to the performance stage. I looked down at the audience, only to see a woman with an elegant silhouette sitting there, but the lighting was somewhat dim, and I couldn't see her face clearly, yet her gaze felt like a brand. firmly locked onto me. Before I could give it more thought, the woman raised her hand, gesturing for me to begin. I forced myself to clear my mind and poured my heart and soul into the performance. The performance ended and I bowed to the audience. Just as I stepped off the stage, a maid blocked my path. "Mr. Jiang, Our Lady invites you to join her for dinner." Hearing this, I instinctively turned to look. The lighting was still dim, and I still couldn't see her face clearly. Walking against the stage lights, I took step after step toward her, till her face finally came into sharp focus before my eyes. A beautiful face was smiling at me, wearing a long, sexy yet casual dress. That effortless, languid charm practically washed over me. She stared at me, her red lips curving into a playful smirk. "Chen. Long time no see." Her voice was incredibly seductive, instantly sending a shiver through my ears. The next second, I suddenly clutched my chest. My heart felt as if it were being squeezed hard by someone, the pain making it almost impossible to breathe. Seeing me like this, she stood up in a panic and threw her arms around me. I let out a gasp, standing there completely frozen, her arms wrapped around mine. "Chen." Her tone was as gentle as water. "I'm back. And I'm never leaving you again." I looked down at this face that was so close, yet left me feeling utterly lost. My mind went completely blank. I tried to push her away. She looked up at me with an amused smile, but when her eyes fell on my bare ring finger, her pupils instantly dilated. I frowned subconsciously and asked hesitantly, "Did we know each other before?" In an instant, the smile on her face froze. She stared at me intently, her voice trembling slightly, as she asked in disbelief, "Jiang Chen, have you really forgotten me?" I searched my memory frantically, but it felt as though my mind was completely blocked off. I shook my head. "I'm sorry. You seem very familiar to me, but I really can't remember." The air instantly froze. She looked completely disheartened. I quickly averted my eyes, not daring to look at her anymore. To escape this strange, awkward tension, I quickly pushed her away. "Ms. Pei, is there anything else you need? If not, I'll go change my clothes first." She hesitated for a moment, before replying in a cold, quiet voice, "Okay." I turned to leave. Her heavy gaze followed me from behind, and I could even feel the sorrow radiating from her. I paused for a second, muttered, "I'm sorry," and then hurried away. I went to the locker room to change back into my own clothes, my heart pounding, unable to calm down. Tang Chu eagerly gathered around me. "Mr. Jiang, do you know that Miss Pei?" My hand paused. I looked at my bewildered face in the mirror. After changing my clothes, I said, "Maybe." Tang Chu's eyes lit up instantly. "Holy crap, she is so beautiful. She is literally the perfect goddess. That face, that body." He leaned in close to my ear and whispered mysteriously, "She looks incredibly hot. Mr. Jiang, you have to get with her." I frowned slightly, suppressing the strange feeling in my heart, and scolded him, "Listen to yourself. How can you judge someone like that in private? I've seen so many people. I can absolutely guarantee." "Hey Mr. Jiang, why is your face turning red? You're so easily embarrassed. How are you going to date in the future?" I shook my head slightly, feeling a bit helpless. "I don't have any plans to date for now." Someone came over carrying tea. "Mr. Tang, Mr. Jiang, thank you for your hard work. Please have some tea." I smiled politely, took the tea, and took a small sip. The next second the maid added, "Miss Pei will arrange a car to take you both back later." I immediately declined. "There is no need to trouble Miss Pei. My family is coming to pick me up." Just as I finished speaking, "Since Mr. Jiang's family is picking him up, then we won't need to arrange a car." A cold female voice suddenly came from the room. I looked toward the sound. Pei Yanran had actually walked in. "What time is Mr. Jiang's family arriving? I'll walk you out." I snapped out of it and quickly looked down at my phone. Just then my mom sent a message. "Shen, I'm outside Molan Mansion. My ride is here." I said to her politely. She replied immediately, "Then let's go. I'll walk you out." "Mr. Jiang." I wanted to refuse, but seeing her like this, I nodded anyway. "Then thank you, Miss Pei." As we stepped out of Molan Mansion, a low-profile Maybach came into view. My mom, Song Hulin, was standing by the car. When she saw me, "Chen." I walked over quickly. "Mom." She handed me a bouquet of flowers. I took them happily. "Thanks, Mom." "Auntie Song." "Oh, Tang." My mom's gaze inadvertently landed on Pei Yanran. Her warm, loving smile instantly froze. "You must be Ms. Pei." "Hello, Miss Pei." Pei Yanran's watery eyes suddenly turned red. Holding back her emotions, she gave my mom a slight nod and said in a cold voice, "I still have things to do, so I'll take my leave now." Before her voice even faded, she turned and walked straight away. The moment she turned around, tears silently streamed down her face. In the bedroom of Molan Mansion, Pei Yanran leaned back in an armchair, sitting in silence, until the first light of dawn filtered through the window, shining on her graying hair. Under the weight of extreme grief and indignation, Pei Yanran's hair had actually turned white overnight. The ringing of her phone suddenly broke the dead silence. Her eyelashes fluttered slightly. After a long pause, she finally picked up her phone. Ji Qinghuan's voice came through. "Yanran." Her voice carried a heavy sense of disappointment. "What is wrong? Isn't this a reunion after a long time? Why do you sound so sad?" She let out a soft sigh. "Jiang Chen has amnesia." Ji Qinghuan gasped. "What?" Are you sure? On Wednesday night, I was playing the bamboo flute in the center of the charity gala stage. As the last note faded, thunderous applause erupted from the audience. I retreated backstage, where an elegant and gentle figure suddenly appeared before me. Xu Jingyun was holding a large bouquet of flowers. Chen, congratulations on a successful performance. Thank you. I smiled and took the flowers, but just then, a cold, displeased gaze pierced through me. I looked over and actually saw Pei Yanran. Her entire body exuded a suffocating, dangerous aura. She walked straight toward me and uttered 3 words, Mr. Jiang. Ms. Pei. I quickly gave her a slight nod. Her gaze swept over me like a laser, then locked onto Xu Jingyun's face. Who is she to you? I was a bit confused, but I still explained. This is my friend. She let out a soft laugh at my words, the corners of her mouth curving into a half smile. A friend? Then her gaze fell on the bouquet of flowers Xu Jingyun had given me. She said with displeasure, or is she your girlfriend? I instinctively explained, just a friend. Pei Yanran chuckled nonchalantly. Then she turned her gaze to Xu Jingyun. So you're just friends? These flowers are so beautiful. Can I take a look? I nodded. I handed the flowers over to her, but the moment I let go, she unexpectedly let go of her hand as well. That fresh, beautiful bouquet fell heavily to the ground, making a dull thud. Oh, oops. I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. Though she said she was sorry, she stepped forward as if by accident and crushed the petals under her foot. I was completely stunned, with a million questions running through my mind. After stepping on it, she bent down to pick the bouquet up anyway and tossed it into the nearby trash can. She did it all in one smooth motion, without a single moment of hesitation. She looked back at me, still wearing that same look of sincere apology on her face. I'm really sorry, Mr. Jiang, but I really didn't mean to do that. Saying that, she added, after this is over, I'll buy you a new bouquet. I was completely speechless. How was that not on purpose? Except for her mouth, every inch of her body screamed that it was deliberate. Even if I were looking for a fight, I couldn't say something so brazen. Mr. Jiang, why aren't you saying anything? With an innocent look she asked again, are you mad at me? I was so frustrated that I almost laughed. I could only give a stiff reply. No. I turned around to apologize to Xu Jingyun, but just as I was about to speak, it is just a bouquet of flowers. Pei Yanran interrupted coldly. I'm sure Ms. Xu isn't the petty type. Don't you agree? She looked at Xu Jingyun with a half smile, her eyes full of provocation. Xu Jingyun's face stiffened, but she forced herself to say, it is just a bouquet of flowers. It doesn't matter. Next time, I'll give Chen something even better. Pei Yanran spoke in a sarcastic tone. Oh, so you give unimportant things to your idol and hide away the important ones? Xu Jingyun's face instantly turned red with embarrassment, just as she was about to explain. Tang Chu rushed over and said anxiously, Mr. Jiang, hurry up and change your clothes. The gala is about to start. I was dragged away by Tang Chu, but I instinctively looked back. Pei Yanran was also about to leave with us, but before she left, she actually shot a provocative look at Xu Jingyun. Xu Jingyun's eyes instantly turned cold, and her lips were tightly pursed. When the charity gala ended, I got into the car, the feel of the bamboo flute still lingering on my fingertips, but my mind was filled with that trampled bouquet of flowers. I pulled at my tie irritably. Tang Chu, in the passenger seat, had been stealing glances at me the whole way. I rubbed my temples. If you have something to say, just say it. He grinned and leaned over. Mr. Jiang, I really had my eyes open today. The eldest Miss Pei's acting skills are absolutely amazing. She stepped on those petals like she was walking a runway. There were so many people at the backstage entrance, yet not a single one dared to say a word. I glanced at him. You seem to admire her quite a bit. It is not really admiration. It is just, Mr. Jiang, I can't help but feel that Miss Pei, the way she looks at you, is really off. Ever since I met Pei Yanran, I've had this very familiar feeling. I'm absolutely certain this woman is definitely not in my memory. But why does it feel like she knows so much about me? By the time Tang Chu and I got back to the apartment, it was already late at night. I took off my suit jacket and tossed it onto the sofa. Just as I was about to go take a shower, Tang Chu's phone suddenly started vibrating like crazy. He answered the call, and his face turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. After hanging up, he looked like he had the bones sucked right out of him. Mr. Jiang. Something went wrong. My heart skipped a beat. Speak. All of our commercial performance bookings for the second half of the year have been completely cancelled. I froze. All of them? The year-end concert at the Huajing Grand Theater, the double concerto with the Shanghai Philharmonic, the Shenzhen International Music Festival, and the Macau New Year's Eve Gala. Tang Chu rattled them off in one breath. All cancelled. My breath caught in my throat. These invitations, I spent 5 long years working my fingers to the bone to get them. From performing in small European pubs to playing at the Royal Albert Hall, from being called that Chinese boy, to having international music critics voluntarily write recommendation columns for me. Every single gig was my absolute lifeblood. What is the reason? I tried my best to keep my voice steady. They said, There was a scheduling conflict, Tang Chu said with a miserable face. They'll pay double the liquidation damages. I let out a cold laugh. On the exact same day, the exact same batch of events, all cancelled. Someone is behind this. Tang Chu looked at me cautiously. Mr. Jiang, could it be the people backing Xu Jingyun? She doesn't have that kind of power. No matter how capable Xu Jingyun is, she doesn't have the leverage to sway so many top promoters in a single night. The only person who could do this. My head started buzzing. That bright, beautiful face flashed in my mind once again. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the apartment doorbell rang. Looking wary, Tang Chu went to open the door. When he returned, Mr. Jiang, outside. There is someone outside. Who? She claims her name is Ji Qinghuan. She says she is Miss Pei's best friend. Ji Qinghuan. Why did I get that simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar feeling again? How annoying. I adjusted my clothes and walked out. Sitting on the living room sofa was a woman in a beige trench coat. Seeing me come out, she stood up and politely extended her hand. Mr. Jiang. Hello you. I shook her hand. Polite yet distant. Sorry to keep you waiting, Ms. Ji. What can I do for you? She got straight to the point. I'm here to ask you something on Yanran's behalf. Do you really not remember anything at all? I remained silent. Ji Qinghuan stared into my eyes. Jiang Chen, 5 years ago, you personally told me something. Do you still remember? I shook my head. She let out a soft laugh, one filled with an indescribable weariness. Back then you told me, Qinghuan, if Yanran's mom comes to take her away, please stop her for me. She is the only one I'll ever marry in this life. Those words were like a key, forcing its way into my brain, but the lock wouldn't budge. I pressed my temples, breaking into a cold sweat. I'm sorry, I really can't remember. Ji Qinghuan pulled a document from her briefcase. Mr. Jiang, this is the exclusive buyout contract between PA Entertainment and all the organizers of your commercial gigs, starting today. For the next 3 years, the schedules of these organizers have been fully bought out by our Peiki Corporation. For the next 3 years, in other words, within China, all of my top-tier commercial gigs had been completely bought out by Pei Yanran alone. I asked, almost gritting my teeth, what is she trying to do? Mr. Jiang, you should ask her that yourself. Ms. Ji, there has to be a limit to how you do things. A limit? She let out a soft laugh. Mr. Jiang, you're talking about limits with Yanran? Miss Pei and I only have a normal professional relationship. Jiang Chen, you can forget about her, but you cannot not know how 5 years ago she was forced onto that plane. My chest tightened. What do you mean? Ji Qinghuan didn't answer my question. Instead, she pulled a faded photo from her pocket and placed it on the coffee table. Take a look. I walked over and picked up the photo. The photo was quite old. The corners were already curled. There were 2 people in it. One was Yanran Pei in a wedding dress. The other was me in a suit. Their eyes were filled with nothing but deep, tender love. My hand holding the photo shook violently. My temples throbbed hard, as if something were trying to break free from inside. A girl was standing on a stage, holding a violin in her hands. Then she ran toward me with a smile, rushing into my arms. Chen, she said with red-rimmed eyes, will you marry me? Immediately after the image shattered, I stumbled back a step, holding onto the coffee table to keep from falling. Mr. Jiang, Qinghuan Ji reached out to support me in a panic. I'm fine. Did you remember something? Is it? I shook my head. Just a few images. Very blurry. The way Qinghuan Ji looked at me changed. From her initial hostility to her current complexity, she hesitated for a few seconds and finally spoke. Jiang Chen, your breakup with Yanran 5 years ago had nothing to do with whether her mother approved. My heart skipped a beat. That year, your father's Jiang's Pharmaceuticals was because of the Pei family on the verge of bankruptcy. My pupils contracted to save your father's company. Yanran made a deal with her mother. She agreed to study abroad in the UK in exchange for bringing Jiang's Pharmaceuticals back to life. My blood ran completely cold in an instant. She let out a soft, mocking laugh. Mr. Jiang, every time you received help from benefactors in your career, every lucky, exceptional promotion you got, it was actually Yanran helping you behind the scenes. The living room fell so silent that only my racing heartbeat could be heard. My fingers clenched tightly. 5 years. I thought those mysterious invitations that came out of nowhere were a godsend. Turns out, someone was out of sight, paving a golden path for me. And yet, when she returned 5 years later, I looked her in the face and asked, did we know each other before? Ji Qinghuan sighed. I shouldn't have told you. My voice was hoarse as I looked at her with bloodshot eyes. Then why did you tell me? She pointed out the window. Because she didn't sleep all night, and most of her hair turned white. I snapped my head up. Jiang Chen, I've never seen anyone whose hair turned white overnight because of someone else. But Yanran did. Outside, The sky was bright, yet I felt as though I had plunged into an endless darkness. After Ji Qinghuan left, Tang Chu came in holding a cup of coffee. Seeing me sitting on the sofa, completely motionless, he carefully placed the coffee on the table. Mr. Jiang. I didn't look up. Mr. Jiang, are you alright? I stared at the photo, my fingertips gently brushing over the girl's face in it. After a long silence, I spoke in a low voice. Tang Chu, look into something for me. Mr. Jiang, what is it? I turned the photo over. On the back was a line of elegant handwriting. Chen, my very first wedding will only be with you. The date was the 8th of June, 5 years ago. I gripped the photo tightly, my knuckles turning white. Find out if on the 8th of June, 5 years ago, at St. John's Church in the western suburbs of Beijing, if there was an unfinished wedding. Tang Chu looked at me, completely bewildered. Mr. Jiang, you. I looked up, my eyes completely bloodshot. Just do it. After Tang Chu left, I sat on the sofa all night long. I must have looked at that photo at least 100 times. The girl in the photo was smiling so defenselessly, while the me in the photo had eyes as clean as if I had just stepped out of springtime. I didn't know how I lost that person. Nor did I know how I lost her. At 6 in the morning, Tang Chu rushed into the apartment. He didn't knock. When he rushed in using the spare key, his hair was a messy bird's nest, with dark circles under his eyes. Mr. Jiang. He slammed a stack of documents onto the coffee table. I stood up abruptly. I found it. I found it. Mr. Jiang. Brace yourself. I grabbed the top sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of the registration records from St. John's Church in the western suburbs of Beijing. 5 years ago, the 8th of June, at 3 p.m. Bride and groom Jiang Chen, Pei Yanran. 2 names were signed in the wedding witness section. One was Ji Qinghuan, and the other was my father Zhang Juyuan. My fingers began to tremble violently. Mr. Jiang. There is another one. Tang Chu pulled out another sheet of paper. This is the payment history from that day. Every single transaction was signed by your father himself. I collapsed back onto the sofa. So that wedding not only actually happened, but was also organized by my father himself. So for the past 5 years, my entire family has been lying to me and me alone. Mr. Jiang. Tang Chu's voice was very low. I looked up at him. There is one more thing. He swallowed hard. I went out in the middle of the night to grab a drink with the old security guard from St. John's. He said, halfway through the wedding that day, something went wrong. What went wrong? When the bride was exchanging rings, the newlyweds fell down the stairs. The bride knocked out cold on the spot. What about me? You blacked out too. But luckily the moment it happened, the bride shielded you tightly. You only had some scratches. Tang Chu paused. After that, some other things happened. I closed my eyes. A hot tear slipped down the corner of my eye. I no longer had the courage to keep listening. In my mind, only that woman's words remained. Jiang Chen. Did you really forget about me? I stood at the entrance of the PA Corporation building, clutching a steaming cup of Americano in my hand. This was something I had Tang Chu look into. Pei Yanran comes downstairs every day at 3 p.m. to get an Americano from the cafe across the street. No sugar, no milk, the kind that is so bitter it makes you frown. Ji Qinghuan said she picked up this habit in the UK and hasn't changed it for 5 years. A 5-year habit. Yet I didn't even remember what she liked to drink. At exactly 3 o'clock, the revolving doors pushed open, and she walked out, holding her phone. She was looking at something. She walked past me without her gaze, even sweeping in my direction, until I called out to her. Pei Yanran? She stopped and turned around. Yes? 2 words. Neat and tidy. Like a knife cutting through the air. The words I had prepared suddenly got stuck in my throat. I wanted to talk to you. She glanced at her watch. Talk about what? I have 15 minutes. I froze for a second, then handed her the coffee. I heard you like Americanos. I just happened to be passing by, so I grabbed one. She glanced at it, but didn't take it. Jiang Chen, you don't have to do this. I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to apologize. She interrupted me, her tone as calm as if she were reading a report. You've already apologized. Ji Qinghuan told me. You said you were sorry, and I received it. Are we done now? Holding the cup of coffee, I stood there on the spot, suddenly realizing how ridiculous I was being. Right. I had apologized, but what about after that? I spoke in a low voice. I really didn't remember anything during that time. About you. About the wedding. About everything. I didn't do it on purpose. I know. Ji Qinghuan told me everything. Amnesia. Selective memory loss, psychological trauma. There is a medical explanation for it, and it makes sense logically. So what? Do you expect me to just act like these past 5 years never happened? Just because you said you don't remember? That is not what I meant. Then what do you mean? I looked into her eyes, unable to utter a single word. I could only look at her, holding back my emotions. The woman took a deep breath. Jiang Chen, I don't hate you. Hating someone is too exhausting, and I don't have the energy for it. I just don't know how to face you, so you don't need to go out of your way to see me. Neither of us owes the other anything. With that, she turned to leave. After taking a couple of steps, she stopped. With her back to me, she said, and one more thing. I don't drink Americanos. I watched Pei Yanran's retreating figure and threw the cup of coffee into the trash can. That night I had insomnia, lying in bed. My mind was completely filled with her cold, distant gaze. She said she didn't hate me, but she hadn't forgiven me either. To her, I had become someone she didn't even need to bother facing. I grabbed my phone and found Tang Chu's contact info. Help me check her schedule for the next few days. 5 minutes later, Tang Chu replied with a question mark. Mr. Jiang, didn't you say not to bother her? I gave an embarrassed cough. I changed my mind. Are you going to check or not? I'm on it. I'm on it. You're my boss. You call the shots. First thing the next morning, Tang Chu sent a report to my phone. It was Pei Yanran's schedule for the week. I looked at the report, my finger hovering over the screen. Thursday, orphanage. Today is Thursday. Without giving myself time to hesitate, I drove straight to the orphanage. Once I arrived, I sat in the car and watched her play games with the children from a distance. She was crouching on the ground, playing with building blocks with a little girl who had pigtails. The way she smiled briefly overlapped with a blurry silhouette in my memory. I remembered that smile. I really did. My heart suddenly skipped a beat. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there, watching her from afar as she played and laughed with the kids, and shared a small piece of cake with them. She looked so happy when she smiled, like a completely different person from the one outside the PAI Corporation building yesterday. So she actually smiled like that in front of others. Only when her car left the orphanage did I start my engine and follow her. Yanran didn't go home. Instead, she headed to a place on the outskirts of Beijing. I followed her car and parked in an old neighborhood. She walked into a music store. I sat in my car and waited for 40 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying a long case. It was a violin case. She carefully placed the violin case in the passenger seat. Just as she bent over to put it down, her eyes suddenly swept across the street toward my car. Our eyes met across the street. She froze for a moment, then stood up and looked at me, as if trying to figure out what exactly I was doing. I got out of the car and walked over. What is wrong with your violin? She glanced at me. The body is getting old. There were a few tiny cracks on the wood, and the seams were coming apart a bit. Uncle Zhao reglued it for me, and changed a new set of strings as well. She spoke in a very flat tone, like she was just chatting with an ordinary friend, but her fingers tightened slightly around the violin case. I caught that detail. Can I take a look? She hesitated for a second before handing the violin case over. I turned it over to the inside of the violin's body and saw an engraved line. My fingers instantly stiffened. Year. It is the initials for Yanran. I looked up at her. Your very first listener gave it to you. Did you carve it? I looked down at the carving. I carved it? I don't remember. She reached out and took the violin case back, placed it on the passenger seat, and closed the car door. She turned to face me and asked, why are you following me? I pursed my lips. I don't know. I just wanted to see you. She didn't say anything. The wind blew by, messing up her hair a bit. She reached up and tucked it behind her ear. Now you've seen me. And then what? I paused for a moment. Are you going to the orphanage again tomorrow? She looked at me, with something indecipherable in her eyes. Yes. Then, I'll come again tomorrow. She didn't respond to my words, but she didn't refuse either. She opened the car door and got in. The window rolled down halfway, and her voice drifted out from inside. Jiang Chen, you don't have to make it up to me like this. I don't need your pity. I don't pity you. I just wanted to come. She didn't say anything else. The car slowly drove out of the street. I stood where I was, watching her taillights disappear around the corner. The phone in my pocket vibrated. It was a text from her. Tomorrow at 10. I stared at those 3 words and smiled as I stood on the street corner. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, getting ready to go home, when my phone suddenly vibrated again. It was a call from Tang Chu. Mr. Jiang, there is something I think I should let you know. Xu Jingyun met with someone this afternoon. Tang Chu lowered his voice. At a private club on the East 3rd Ring Road. I had someone look into it. The person she met with is named Pei Jingsing. I had never heard of this name before. Who is that? Tang Chu paused for a moment before speaking. He is the eldest son of the main branch of the PA family. By seniority, he is Pei Yanran's cousin. What is he looking for Xu Jingyun for? I don't know, but I did dig up some old history while I was at it. 5 years ago, when Pei Yanran's mother was in power, she kicked Pei Jingsing's father off the board of directors. The two families haven't really associated with each other since then. To put it simply, there is a history of bad blood between them. Holding my phone, my mind was racing. Xu Jingyun plus Pei Yanran's cousin. With these two coming together, it was obvious who their target was. Can you find out what he has been up to lately? Yeah, I'm already looking into it. But this guy keeps a pretty low profile. There is not much movement on the surface. Keep an eye on him. Let me know immediately if you get any news. At 9:30, the next morning, I arrived at the entrance of the orphanage. In my hand, I held a hot latte with extra sugar and milk, along with a sandwich I'd brought as well. I arrived half an hour earlier than the agreed time, so I just sat on a bench by the entrance and waited. At 9:50, a white Porsche pulled up at the gate. She was wearing a pink coat today, with her hair tied up in a high ponytail and wearing a pair of silver earrings. She got out of the car. Seeing the coffee and paper bag in my hand, she asked, "You even brought a sandwich today? I was worried you'd be hungry." She took the coffee and the sandwich, looked down at them, and didn't say anything, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward. Instead of eating, she held them in her hand and turned to walk into the yard. I followed her. The activities at the orphanage were similar to yesterday's, reading picture books with the children, building blocks, and having snacks. She was fully engaged the entire time, squatting on the ground and playing with the kids. Eat slowly. There is still plenty left. I helped hand out the fruit nearby, keeping my eyes on her out of the corner of my eye. When snack time was over, the children were taken for their afternoon nap. She sat on a swing in the yard and finally unwrapped the sandwich, taking a bite. I sat down on the swing next to her. Yesterday, you told me to watch out for Jing Shu. Yeah? You don't believe me? I continued to ask, what about your cousin then? She paused in mid-bite of her sandwich. It took her several seconds to slowly swallow it. She didn't look at me, her voice unusually calm. Did you look into him? I didn't, but somebody saw him meeting with Jing Shu. She fell silent for a long time. The wind blew, making the swing set sway gently. Then, she spoke. Pei Jingxing is my uncle's son, her voice very soft. Ever since my mom kicked his dad off the board 5 years ago, he has felt like our branch of the family owes him. I asked with concern, has he been causing trouble for you? She didn't answer. She just turned her head and met my gaze. He doesn't dare to do anything openly, but if he teams up with someone else, then all bets are off. My heart sank. She knew. She knew everything. You knew about him meeting with Xu Jingyun? I didn't know they met. But I guess they would. Xu Jingyun hates me, and Pei Jingxing hates me too. When two people who hate me get together, it is not like they're planning a birthday party for me. I was almost amused by her tone, but I couldn't bring myself to smile. What do you plan to do? Nothing. She rewrapped the sandwich she had taken a bite of. If they want to come after me, they'd better have what it takes. She said this in a very flat tone, as if she didn't care about those two at all, but I noticed her fingers holding the paper bag tightened slightly. I opened my mouth, just about to speak, when the phone in my pocket suddenly started vibrating. I pulled it out to look. It was a message from Tang Chu. Mr. Jiang, I found something. Pei Jingxing registered a new company 3 days ago. The legal representative is someone you don't know. But looking past the shell companies, he is the ultimate beneficiary. This new company, just yesterday, submitted a letter of intent to acquire to Pei's Entertainment. He wants to buy a business unit under Pei's Entertainment. This business unit happens to consist of the subsidiaries that handle all of your performances. I stared at the screen, my pupils contracting slightly. I looked up at her. She was looking down at her own phone, her brow slightly furrowed. Obviously, she had also received the news. After reading the message, she put down her phone. She looked up at me and smiled faintly. Jiang Chen, are you busy this afternoon? No. I shook my head. Then come with me somewhere. Where? She stood up, brushed off some non-existent dust from her clothes, and curled her lips into a smile. To see my dear cousin, of course. Before I could answer, she had already turned and walked toward the car by the entrance. Yan Yi suddenly turned back to look at me. What are you staring at? Let's go. I quickly walked around to the passenger side and got in. The car drove off immediately. The wind blew in, tossing the stray hairs around her ears. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. Her expression was very calm, perhaps even a bit too calm. What are you planning to say to him? Say what? Say that you know about the little stunts he is pulling behind your back. She smiled faintly. I won't say a thing. I was somewhat puzzled. What do you mean? He registered a new company and submitted a letter of intent to acquire. These are all legal and compliant business moves. If I just rush in to confront him, he will turn it back on me and say that I, his cousin, am narrow-minded and can't stand to see family doing business. She paused. So I'm not going to talk to him about the acquisition. Then what are we going to see him for? She glanced at me, her lips curving upward. To give him a gift. A gift. To congratulate him on starting his company. I was stunned for a moment, and then I suddenly realized what she wanted to do. I leaned back against the seat and smiled too. You are really wicked. She didn't respond, but the corners of her mouth curved up a bit more. The car pulled up in front of a new office building. I looked up. This building was right across from the PAI's entertainment headquarters, separated only by a street, directly facing the window of the CEO's office of Pei's Entertainment. Choosing this location was a blatant provocation. She got out of the car, took an exquisite gift bag out of the trunk, and walked straight into the lobby of the office building. The receptionist froze for a moment when she saw her. Ms. Pei. What brings you here? Pei Yanran smiled gently and graciously. I'm here to see my cousin. I heard his new company opened, so I came to congratulate him. The receptionist hesitated for a moment, but still made a phone call upstairs. After hanging up the phone, the receptionist's expression was a bit complicated. Mr. P invites you up. It is on the 16th floor. Thank you. Pei Yanran thanked her with a smile, and walked towards the elevator holding the gift bag. I followed her in. The moment the elevator doors closed, the gentle smile on her face vanished. You acted so well just now. Like what? Like a good sister. She didn't speak, but in the reflection of the elevator door, I saw a flash of coldness in her eyes. They arrived at the 16th floor. At the end of the corridor was a lavishly decorated office. The door was half open. She pushed the door open and walked straight in. Pei Jingsing looked to be in his early 30s, with a look of shrewdness in his eyes. When he saw Pei Yanran walking in, a smile instantly plastered across his face. He stood up to welcome her. "Yanran, what brings you here?" Without even telling me beforehand, so I could have had my staff prepare. That smile was way too enthusiastic. Obviously fake at first glance. Pei Yanran smiled too, looking even more genuine than he did. "Joe, such a big deal like opening a new company, and you didn't even let me know. I had to hear about it from someone else. So, I came over specifically to congratulate you." She set the gift bag on his desk, her movements gentle and her posture elegant. "You're far too polite. It is just a small-scale venture. Nothing worth making a fuss about." "A small-scale venture? With this decor and this location? It doesn't look like a small-scale venture at all, Joe. It looks like you're gearing up for something huge." "Not at all, not at all. It is nothing compared to the scale of Pei's entertainment." His gaze suddenly landed on me, as if he had just noticed my presence. "And this is my friend, Jiang Chen." Pei Yanran introduced me very casually, as if she had just brought along someone of no consequence. When Pei Jingsing heard my name, there was an almost imperceptible flicker in his eyes, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Mr. Jiang." He extended his hand toward me. "I've heard a lot about you, an international musician. It is an absolute honor." I shook his hand. "You're too kind, Mr. Pei." He gave me a second look, his eyes filled with scrutiny and appraisal. He withdrew his hand and looked back at Pei Yanran. "Yanran, you haven't been looking very well lately." He put on an expression of deep concern. "Have you been staying up late again? Your health is what matters most. Don't push yourself too hard." "I'm fine." He seemed to suddenly remember something. "Oh right. I heard you've been getting close with the Shu family lately." My heart tightened. He brought it up on his own accord. The smile on Pei Yanran's face didn't change at all. "Brother, you're certainly well informed. The circle is only so big. It is hard not to hear about it." I noticed. His gaze swept quickly across my face. "The Zeus are quite prominent in Beijing when dealing with them. It never hurts to be careful." He spoke as if giving a well-meaning warning, but I could hear the subtext. He was hinting to Pei Yanran, "I know who you're dealing with." And also hinting, "I know the person next to you has ties to the Shu family as well." Pei Yanran didn't take the bait. She just smiled and nodded. "You're right, brother. Then I won't keep you from your work. Let's have dinner together some other day when you're free." With that she turned and left. I followed her. When we reached the door, I glanced back. Pei Jingsing was already standing behind his desk. The smile on his face had completely vanished, his gaze as dark and cold as a winter blade. The moment the elevator doors closed, I let out a long breath. "Did you feel that? He is not here to play business games with you. He is here to let you know that he knows what you're doing, and he knows who you're with." Pei Yanran didn't say anything, but her fingers curled slightly. We walked out of the lobby and got back into her car. She didn't start the car right away. Instead, she leaned back against the seat, looking through the windshield. The top floor windows of the PA's entertainment headquarters building. That was her office. He purposely opened his company right across from me, just so that every time I look up, I can see his sign. "Do you know what he wants?" She was silent for a moment before saying something that sent a chill down my spine. "He wants the way my mother kicked his father off the board back then, to play out all over again. Except this time, the one being kicked out will be me." The car fell silent for a few seconds. I spoke up and asked, "So what do you plan to do?" She turned to look at me with a smile, and then started the car. I leaned back in the passenger seat, watching her calm profile out of the corner of my eye. This woman was even more complex than I had imagined. She didn't need me to protect her. What she needed was someone to stand beside her, and when she made her move, not hold her back. That night, I went back to my apartment and sat on the sofa, replaying the scene in Pei Jingsing's office today over and over in my mind. His words, "Shu Jingyun has been quite interested in your friend lately," kept ringing in my ears. Pei Jingsing hadn't just said that casually. He said it intentionally for Pei Yanran to hear. He was telling her, "I know who is around you. And I also know who wants to make a move on you." I picked up my phone and sent Tang Chu a message. "Help me look into something. How do Shu Jingyun and Pei Jingsing know each other? When did they meet? Was there a mutual connection who introduced them?" A few minutes later, Tang Chu replied, "Got it. By the way, Mr. Jiang, I forgot to mention something. While you were out this afternoon, somebody delivered a package to your apartment. The sender's name is listed as Ms. Shu." I stared at the screen, my pupils contracting slightly. "Shu Jingyun knows my address." Before I could reply, a second message popped up. "I didn't open the package. I left it under the shoe cabinet by your door." I got up and walked to the door. Sure enough, I saw a small cardboard box under the shoe cabinet. I crouched down, opened the package, and found a black velvet box inside. Opening the lid, there was a pair of cufflinks inside, with a card pressed underneath. "Somebody stepped on the flowers that night. Here is a pair of cufflinks to make up for it. I hope to see you wearing them the next time we meet. Shu Jingyun." I stared at that card for a long time. She sent me cufflinks, and Pei Jingyang brought her up in front of Pei Yanran. These two, one in the open, one in the dark, seemed to be playing a game of chess together, and the pieces on the board weren't just Pei Yanran and me. I closed the box, placed it on the coffee table, and replied to Tang Chu. Got it about the package. Keep investigating Pi Jingyang. The more details the better. Putting down my phone, I leaned back on the sofa and closed my eyes. The next morning, I arrived at the gates of the orphanage 40 minutes early. In my hands, I was still holding a hot latte and a sandwich, but I had done one more thing today. I had Tang Chu compile a detailed profile of Pei Jingyang overnight, printed it out and put it in a manila envelope. When she pulled up to the gate and saw the envelope in my hand, she raised an eyebrow. What is that? Your cousin's file. I handed her the envelope. I had Tang Chu dig into him all night, how many companies he actually owns, where his funding comes from, and everyone he has met with in the last 3 months. It is all in there. She took the envelope but didn't open it right away. Instead, she looked up at me. Why are you looking into him? Because he is coming after you, and I can't let you face him alone. She looked at me, holding the thick stack of documents in her hand. She fell silent for a few seconds. Then she slipped the envelope into her bag, the corner of her mouth twitching slightly. Thanks. Her voice was very quiet, but I heard it. That day at the orphanage, when she was playing games with the kids, she seemed more relaxed than before. I sat on a nearby bench, unwrapping my sandwich to eat. The swing squeaked back and forth. Sunlight filtered down through the leaves, and the air smelled of sunshine and cookies. I watched her crouch on the ground, patiently teaching a little girl how to do a puzzle, her ponytail swaying with every movement. She wasn't the person in my memory, but I was getting to know her all over again piece by piece. That afternoon, she didn't bring up Pei Jingyang, nor did she ask why I was helping her. She only stood by the orphanage gates as I was leaving and said to me, "Are you coming tomorrow?" "Yes." "Then bring me an iced Americano." I blinked in surprise. "I thought you didn't drink cold drinks." She tilted her head, a playful glint in her eyes. "Didn't you say you'd slowly learn all my habits?" After saying that, she turned and got into the car. I stood at the entrance of the orphanage and smiled for several seconds. Then I took out my phone and sent her a text message. "I'll bring you an iced one tomorrow." She didn't reply, but I saw her white Porsche stop briefly at the intersection before turning and disappearing from sight. Through the car window, I could vaguely see her looking down at her phone. After returning from the orphanage that day, I sat in my apartment going over that file on Pei Jingyang 3 times from cover to cover. Tang Chu had been very thorough with the company registration info. In addition to the company registration information and financial transactions, he had also attached Pei Jingyang's social activity log for the past 3 months, whom he met, what events he attended, and even which restaurant he had dined at to host people on a particular night were all clearly listed. I stared at one of the records, and my finger paused. 3 months ago, at a private equestrian club in the suburbs of Beijing, Pei Jingyang had met once with Xu Jingyun's father, Xu Mingyuan. The meeting lasted about 40 minutes. Xu Mingyuan, Xu Jingyun's dad. I read that line of text once more, then picked up my phone and called Tang Chu. That time Pei Jingyang met with Xu Mingyuan. What did they talk about? Can we find out? There was a 2-second silence on Tang Chu's end. Mr. Jiang, for a meeting of that level, it is impossible for the details to leak out. But I can tell you one thing. Not long after that meeting, a company under Xu Mingyuan's name injected a sum of money into Pei Jingyang's new company. The amount wasn't large, just enough to cover a fraction of the registered capital. I frowned upon hearing this. So what you're saying is, the Xu family is backing him up? Yes, you could understand it that way. I hung up the phone. I leaned back on the sofa and thought for a long time. Pei Jingyang has brought the Xu family on board. Xu Jingyun and I have bad blood between us. There is no way Xu Mingyuan doesn't know about that. His willingness to invest in Pei Jingyang shows he isn't just helping his daughter get even, he is also personally happy to see Pei Jingyang go up against Pei Yanran. This force is even larger than I imagined. And as for Pei Yanran, she is still sitting across the chessboard, waiting for her opponent to make the first move. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the night sky. She can afford to wait. I can't. Early the next morning, I didn't go to the orphanage. I went to a certain place instead, St. John's Church in the western suburbs of Beijing. This was the first time in my memory that I had actively walked into this place. Those blurry images from before had all been triggered passively. I pushed open the door and walked in. It was completely empty inside, except for an elderly lady, dressed in black, sitting in the front row, bowing her head in prayer. I quieted my steps, sat down in the back row, and tried to search my mind for memories of this place. But I couldn't remember a thing. Just as I was about to leave, an old raspy voice came from behind me. "You're Jiang Chen, right?" I turned around and saw an old man in a gray shirt standing at the entrance. "And you are?" "I'm the caretaker here. My last name is Zhou." The old man walked over. "You look familiar. I remember seeing you here before." "You remember me?" My heart skipped a beat. "I do. 5 years ago. You had your wedding here." Caretaker Zhou sat down beside me. "What do you want to know?" "On the wedding day. From what time to what time?" "From 3 o'clock to 8 p.m. I was on duty that afternoon. The groom and the bride came together. And then, the ceremony started at 6 p.m. The church was filled with white lilies. The moment the bride walked in, everyone went quiet. You were so nervous you could barely speak. The man paused for a moment, and then, the stage collapsed. My blood ran cold, without any warning. The entire main stage just collapsed. The bride was closest to you. Her first instinct was to shield you. You only had minor scratches, but you fainted afterward. When the ambulance arrived, the doctor said neither of you was seriously hurt. Fainting was just from extreme shock. Then what? Both of you were put into the ambulance. I saw you off at the door. And after that? What happened after that? I don't know. Mr. Joe stood up for what happened next and patted my shoulder. You'll have to ask the people around you. I'm just a caretaker. I rushed out of the church, pulling out my phone as I walked. Tang Chu answered very quickly. Tang Chu, the things between Yanran and me, you know about them, right? There was a 5-second silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? The last time I saw Pei Yanran. Tang Chu's breathing grew heavy. At the airport, she was taken away by force, and then you passed out. And when you woke up you had amnesia. He fell silent for a long time after the wedding went wrong. The Pei family arranged for her to go to the UK. We all thought. He didn't go on. Thought what? Say it. Thought she wanted a better life, and didn't want anything to do with you anymore. I laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. You all thought that? Yeah. Then why didn't any of you tell me? Tang Chu didn't answer. I demanded angrily. Why? Because no one wanted you to get hurt again. You were unconscious in the hospital for a whole night, screaming her name all night long. No one had the heart to make you remember her again. Tang Chu's voice went hoarse too. I took a deep breath, and then, a few days later, your dad took you back home. Later, your father told you that Pei Yanran had left, that she went to the UK. You had absolutely no reaction at the time. The doctor said it was fainting and memory loss caused by extreme emotional distress. 5 years. I closed my eyes. Everyone kept me in the dark. I opened my eyes, looked at the road ahead, and drove toward the Jiang group. I stepped on the gas. A car pulled up to the entrance of the Jiang group. The girl at the front desk froze when she saw me. Mr. Jiang? I didn't stop. The elevator doors closed, and I pressed the button for the top floor. I pushed the door open and walked into Jiang Jayan's office. For 5 years, everyone kept me in the dark, and I knew absolutely nothing. My father was sitting behind the desk reading documents. When he looked up and saw me, the pen in his hand stopped. Chen, why are you here? I didn't sit down. I spoke directly. You personally organized the wedding. Your name is written in the witness column. The payment records are all signed by you. So why is it that when I forgot about Yanran, you never said a single word about her? He put down his pen, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me for a long time. You know everything now. Jiang Jian closed his eyes for a moment. After the accident at the wedding, she was put on a plane. Her mother personally led the way. I thought she chose a better life. Not you. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. You didn't remember anything when you woke up. The doctor said it was traumatic amnesia caused by extreme emotional distress. I thought that was God's mercy to you. Mercy. I couldn't keep my voice down anymore. You took a person's 5 years of sacrifice and treated it as a betrayal. She went to the UK in exchange for bringing the Jiang Corporation back to life. Every helpful benefactor in your career was a path she paved. You all thought she abandoned me, but in reality she was the one holding up this whole family for you. The office door was pushed open. Song Helan stood at the door and saw my face. She set down the tea in her hand. Chen, calm down. Mom, your smile froze when you met her. You were polite and distant, like you were meeting a stranger. Don't you feel guilty? Pei Yanran just up and left, leaving you unconscious and calling out her name. I hated her for abandoning you. I hated her for 5 years. She didn't abandon me. She was forced away by her mother. That day at the airport, she turned around and screamed for me to wait for her, and then she was dragged onto the plane. I watched her get taken away with my own eyes. Then, when I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. Song Hulin's eyes wavered. What you all thought was betrayal was actually her sacrifice. She carried the burden for you guys in the UK for 5 years, while you all hated her for 5 years. And I didn't even have the chance to hate her, because I couldn't even remember her name. Jiang Jiryuan gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white. The silence was heavier than anything. Tang Chu stood outside the door, not daring to come in, but her eyes were red. I turned to look at her. Tang Chu took a breath. After the wedding accident, both you and Pei Yanran were taken away in ambulances. When she passed out, she kept holding onto your hand and wouldn't let go. She only let go when you reached the hospital. You only had minor scratches and woke up very quickly. Her injuries were more severe than yours. That night you stayed by her hospital bed the whole time. When she woke up, you two held each other for a long time. Afterward, her mother brought a group of people and took her straight from the hospital. Then you chased her to the airport. You know what happened after that. All of us thought she didn't want you anymore. We couldn't bear to let you remember her again. We just wanted to protect you. Protect me. My voice cracked slightly. You were protecting someone who didn't remember a thing while she was out there, carrying the burden for 5 years. For this person who didn't remember anything. Chen. I turned and walked toward the door. Song Helan tried to grab me, but I walked straight out. As the car drove out of the Jiang Group's main gate, I dialed Tang Chu's number. Find out where she is right now. Mr. Jiang, Miss Pei is currently at the orphanage. I spun the steering wheel and drove toward the orphanage. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Tang Chu. I glanced at it, turned off the screen, and focused on the only place I wanted to go right now. When I found her at the orphanage, she was squatting on the lawn braiding a little girl's hair. When she turned and saw me, her smile froze for a second before fading away, replaced by that familiar expression of hers. What are you doing here? I went to see my dad. She didn't speak, but her eyes narrowed slightly. 5 years ago, my dad thought you chose to leave me. So he kept me in the dark for 5 years. My mom hated you for 5 years. Pei Yanran's eyelashes fluttered. You finally found out. Her eyes welled up with tears, as if she were holding something back. Every day in England, I watched videos of your performances. You played Old Dreams at the Musikverein in Vienna. That was the piece I chose. 5 years have already passed. You missed the best 5 years of my life. I pulled her tightly into my arms. After a long time, she looked up. 5 years ago, you told me you'd only marry me in this lifetime. I remembered that for 5 years. Did you forget that too? Fragments of memory suddenly came rushing back. In the church, I was so nervous I could barely speak straight. She walked out in her white veil, and everyone went silent. I remember. I said you are the love of my life, and you are the only one I will ever marry. She smiled until her eyes crinkled. Then she kissed me. It was very light and brief. I squeezed her hand tightly and kissed her back. Yanran, don't ever leave me again. We will be together for the rest of our lives. Okay. She buried her face in the crook of my neck, her voice muffled. I've been waiting to hear you say that for 5 years. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Tang Chu. Mr. Jiang, Pei Jingsing's letter of intent for the acquisition has officially entered the review process. Xu Mingyuan injected additional capital 3 times more than before. Pei's Entertainment is calling an emergency board meeting. She lifted her head from my shoulder and saw my phone screen. Pei Jingsing is getting anxious. Tripling the capital means either he has secured a bigger backer or he wants to muddy the waters before the official review. She let go of my shirt, looked up at me, and asked, "How did you know that?" The information about Pei Jingsing I gave you. I kept a copy of it too. I studied it carefully over the last couple of days. She froze for a second, and then she smiled. When did you start taking the initiative like this? Ever since you said tomorrow at 10. The corners of her mouth curved up again. This time it wasn't tentative, it was a look of certainty, as if she had finally confirmed something. I have a plan for next week's board meeting, but right now. She reached out and took my fingers in hers, holding on very tightly, just like she had held onto my hand in the hospital 5 years ago. Right now. I just want to be with you. Her fingers remained tightly clasped with mine, and I didn't let go either. That night, she pulled me to sit with her on the bench at the entrance of the orphanage. Since Jingsing wants to muddy the waters at the special board meeting, I will make sure he has to drown in his own muddy water. Acquiring the subsidiary is just his first step. His real goal is control of Pei's Entertainment. How can you be sure? Because he opened his company right across from mine. Someone who only wants to buy a subsidiary wouldn't pay that kind of rent just to open an office. He is declaring war, not doing business. How do you plan to expose him? She shook her head gently. I won't expose him. I'll let him expose himself. Do you still have the files Tang Chu gave you? I nodded. Yes. She smiled gently. Good. In a few days, I need you to stand by my side. A few days later, in the conference room on the top floor of Pei's Entertainment headquarters, I arrived early. Tang Chu was next to me, holding a stack of documents in his hands. He looked nervous, but his eyes were filled with excitement. Mr. Jiang, this show today is something I've been waiting 3 months for. I didn't say anything, my fingers gripping Jingsing's file. Every single cash flow in here, every capital injection, every meeting time and location. I had memorized them all. This was a knife. Today I was going to help hand her that knife. Just then, the board members filed in one after another. The last one to enter was Jingsing. When he saw me, a flash of scrutiny crossed his eyes, but he quickly hid it away. Yanran, long time no see. You look much better. Have a seat. The board meeting begins. Pei Jinghang takes the initiative to speak. Everyone, I submitted a letter of intent for an acquisition a few days ago. The target is under Pei's Entertainment, the subsidiary responsible for coordinating performances. Yanran, you should have also seen the contents of the letter of intent. This acquisition is a good thing for Pei's Entertainment. The subsidiary will operate more efficiently on its own, and the pressure on the parent company's financial reports will also be reduced. Pei Yanran doesn't say anything. She just looks at him, the corner of her mouth curling up slightly. Pei Jinghang, I read your letter of intent. There is one small problem. The legal person of the acquiring entity you submitted is named Zhou Wei, but after looking through the equity structure, the ultimate beneficiary is actually you. The conference room goes quiet. Pei Yanran places a document on the table. Pei Jinghang picks it up and glances at it, his smile starting to stiffen. This is just a formatting flaw. It doesn't affect the substance of the acquisition. Pei Yanran ignores him. The second question, who is the strategic investor? Sweat starts to bead on Pei Jingyang's forehead. This involves commercial confidentiality and is not convenient to disclose. Pei Yanran smiles. There is no need for you to disclose it. I've already looked into it. Two companies under Xu Mingyuan's name jointly injected the capital. Pei Jinghang's face pales. There are whispers in the conference room. Pei Yanran picks up a third document, her voice still just as flat. The third question, in the third note of your letter of intent, states, after the acquisition is completed, the acquirer has the right to carry out asset restructuring and business direction adjustments on the target company. What does the scope of asset restructuring include? Pei Jingyang doesn't answer. The conference room goes completely silent. I watch this scene play out coldly from the side. He doesn't want to buy the subsidiary. He wants to take 15% and then use that 15% as leverage to pry away control of the entire Pesia's entertainment. Pei Jingxing stood up. You think this little bit of stuff can stop me? Pei Yanran sat in the head seat. You think I only have these 3 documents? Pei Jingxing's eyes suddenly narrowed. Tang Chu handed the stack of documents in his hand to Pei Yanran, then walked to the door and pushed it open. 2 people were standing outside, a lawyer and an auditor. Starting last week they conducted a complete compliance audit on your company. The findings include abnormal capital flows, the actual controlling party concealing acquisition terms, and suspected hostile takeover. And one more thing. She paused and looked at me. I walked over to Pei Yanran's side. The last trace of a smile on Pei Jingxing's face completely shattered. When you kicked my dad out of the board of directors, I said back then that sooner or later, you would pay the price. A flash of impatience crossed Pei Yanran's face. My mom kicked your dad off the board because he embezzled 30 million in corporate funds and falsified accounts for 3 years. You didn't actually think your dad was framed, did you? He wasn't framed. He broke the law and was kicked out. My mom didn't pursue criminal charges and even left my uncle a way out, but you thought he was wronged. So you held a grudge for 5 years and planned all of this. Well, let me tell you right now, everything you've done is in vain. Pei Jingxing's pupils contracted sharply. How do you know that? When my mom cleaned out the board, she kept the complete audit files. I've read them all. She looked back at the other board members. Everyone. The background of Pei Jingyang, the actual controller of the acquiring party, and all the issues with the letter of intent have already been laid out on the table. Now, please cast your votes. The oldest board member spoke up. The acquisition proposal is rejected. Initiate a compliance investigation. No one objected. Pei Jinghang stood in the middle of the conference room like a broken blade. The gloomy look in his eyes was still there, but the edge of the blade had gone dull. He looked at me, then at Pei Yanran. His lips moved slightly, but he made no sound. Then he turned and walked toward the door. At the doorway he paused for a moment and looked back at Pei Yanran. You think this is over? Pei Yanran didn't even look at him. You deliberately set up your company right across from mine. Now, when I look up at your sign, all I can see is a wall full of violations. Pei Jinghang left. The door of the conference room closed, and the tension in the air dissipated. The 7 board members were all looking at Pei Yanran with something in their eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't fear, it was respect. Pei Yanran and I walked out of the Pei's entertainment headquarters, standing across the street from Pei Jinghang's company. The sign was still there, reflecting the sunlight off the glass curtain wall. The sign read Jingyang Culture Media, in large letters, looking as brand new as if it had just been hung up yesterday. Looking at the sign, I said in a deep voice, once the compliance investigation begins, he will either have to liquidate or transfer the assets and run. There is no third option. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. This sign will be gone within 3 days. By then, when I look up every day, she turned to look at me. All I'll see is the sky. Only softness remained in her eyes. Pei Yanran walked out of the building. Seeing me, the corners of her mouth curved upward. You're here. I hand her the latte. She takes it and looks down at it. No sugar. I remember. She smiles, holding the cup. Her fingers touch the side of the cup. You finally remembered. Tang Chu's call comes in. Bro, all the compliance investigation results are out. Pei Jingxing has been found guilty of malicious acquisition. The company's accounts are frozen. Xu Mingyuan's capital injection has been refunded. He liquidated everything overnight and ran. Xu Jingyun has also withdrawn all collaborations and released a statement cutting ties. Pei Yanran smiles softly after hearing this. His teeth were already knocked out, yet he still wanted to take one last bite. I look at the empty glass wall opposite us. You were right. Looking up, there is only the sky left. She turns to look at me, her eyes soft. I continue, but there are still 2 things left to do. My mom hated her for 5 years. Her mom sent her away for 5 years. After returning to the Jiang residence, Song Hulin is sitting in the living room holding a teacup. I have to resolve the first one first. Mom, I came to tell you something, my mother says without even looking at me. Here to speak up for her again. I'm not speaking up for her. I'm telling you the truth. 5 years ago, she didn't leave voluntarily. She was forced away by her mother. That day at the airport, she turned around and screamed for me to wait for her. And then she was dragged onto the plane. I fainted right after chasing after her. I didn't remember anything when I woke up. Song Hyelan's hand pauses, her teacup suspended in midair. What? You thought she abandoned me. So you hated her for 5 years. But she never abandoned me. She carried the weight for the Jiang group in the UK for 5 years, paving the way for me, taking the fall for me. You always thought she chose to leave. But she was sent away. Song Hyelan's hand holding the teacup tightened. I hated the wrong person. My mother's tears instantly welled up. I only saw her leave. You called out her name all night. I thought she didn't want you anymore. I've hated her for 5 years. I don't want you to hate her. My voice choked up a bit as well. I'm bringing her home for dinner tomorrow. Song Hyelan wiped her tears away and nodded. Okay. Jiang Chen came out of the study, his fists clenched tightly. He remained silent for a long time. She carried the weight for the Jiang group in the UK for 5 years. Yet, I never even said thank you. I was the one who organized the wedding back then, and my name was on the witness line. But after something went wrong at the wedding, I kept it from you for 5 years. I thought I was protecting you, but I was actually just running away. He pulled out a box from behind his back. I should have given you this earlier. It is my fault. The box was opened. Inside were photos from the wedding 5 years ago, along with a videotape. The cover read, the 8th of June, St. John's Church. As the tape started playing, she appeared on screen in a white gown, walking toward me step by step with a bouquet of lilies. On screen, I was stammering nervously. The whole crowd laughed, and she laughed too. Then, she ran toward me and threw herself into my arms. The crowd cheered, bursting into a round of applause. My on-screen self could only hold her and grin like a fool. My tears started to fall. My memories came rushing back, but this time they weren't fragments. It is a complete picture. The memories locked in the deepest part of my mind have been unlocked. In the afternoon, Pei Yanran received a phone call. She froze for 2 seconds before answering. I saw what happened at the board meeting. You did better than I did back then. 5 years ago, when I sent you away. I thought I was protecting you. During your 5 years in the UK, all the paths I laid out for you, you turned them into your own path. That boy Jiang Chen, I used to think he wasn't good enough for you, but over these past 5 years I've come to understand a lot. I know this is the man you chose for yourself. And no one can stop you. Pei Yanran's voice trembled slightly. Mom, you finally said it. Pei's mother paused on the other end of the line. I owe you more than just an apology. You will make the decisions for the PA Corporation from now on. I won't make any more decisions for you. You've already proven that you can do better than me. Pei Yanran hung up the phone. She stood by the window and stared out for a long time. She didn't even notice when I walked in. After a long while, she turned around, saw me and smiled. My mom said, "You're worth it." She also said she won't make decisions for me anymore. She said I can already do better than her. I walked over and pulled her into my arms. These words were what she had waited 5 years to hear. They meant more than any apology ever could. The next day, I took Pei Yanran back to the Jiang family home. Song Hyelan stood at the door, looking intently at Pei Yanran. Yanran, I hated you for 5 years. I thought you left and abandoned Chen, but Chen told me that you turned around at the airport and yelled for him to wait. Song Hyelan walked forward and took Pei Yanran's hand. Yanran, I was wrong. The pain you suffered these past 5 years, part of that was my fault. I didn't know you had paved the way for him. I'm sorry. Pei Yanran's tears fell silently. Yanran, I owe you too a wedding. The one I planned for you 5 years ago was never finished. Let me plan it for you again. This time we will definitely finish it. Okay. On the day of the wedding, St. John's Church, old Joe stood at the door and watched us walk in. You're finally back. I've been waiting here for 5 years. Every day before opening the doors, I would look at that repaired stage, thinking that you would come back one day. Standing on the stage, my voice still choked up from nervousness. 5 years ago, I was too nervous to speak. This time, I had only one sentence. Pei Yanran, you are the only one for me in this lifetime. This time, I won't let anyone take you away. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I also have only one sentence, Chen. I've waited for you for 5 years, and now, the wait is finally over. After speaking, they began to exchange rings. The rings that couldn't be exchanged 5 years ago were finally put on now. Song Hyelan sat in the audience, her tears flowing continuously, but the smile on her face was more genuine than 5 years ago. Pei Yanran's mother sat on the other side, saying nothing, just watching her daughter in the white wedding gown. I held her hand. What do you see when you look up now? She looked up at the view ahead, the sky, and our happy future. On the morning of our first day of marriage, I opened my eyes. The sunlight slipped through the gap in the curtains. I reached out, But the other side of the bed was empty. Panic struck my heart, and I bolted upright. I rushed out of the bedroom barefoot. No one was in the living room or kitchen. Not until I looked out at the balcony. She was sitting in a rattan chair, the morning light spilling over her hair, holding a cup of warm water in her hands, staring blankly into the distance. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her from behind. "You scared me to death." My sudden movement made her laugh, and she leaned back into my embrace. "I'm just used to waking up early. During those 5 years in the UK, that is how I woke up every single day. Why wake up so early? To wait for you. Wait for me to do what? To wait for your performance videos to go online. To wait for your new album release. And to wait for you to play that melody of past dreams." She paused for a moment, her voice as soft as mist. "The very first thing I did every day when I woke up was check to see where you were." Hearing this, it truly hurt, but it also warmed my heart. 5 years. She woke up looking for me every single day, while I couldn't even remember her name. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "From now on, the first thing you do when you wake up, you won't have to search anymore, because I'll be sleeping right next to you." She didn't say anything, but her fingers tightened around my sleeve, and she let out a soft hum. In the kitchen, I made her a bowl of congee. She held the bowl, taking small, slow sips. Suddenly I remembered what Ji Qinghwan had said, that she had survived on nutritional IV fluids for a long time in the UK. Watching her eat her congee, my heart ached and softened all at once. "Eat slowly. There is no rush." She looked up at me, the corner of her mouth curving into a slight smile. "With you staring right next to me, how can I possibly rush?" "All right. I won't look." I turned my head to pretend to look out the window, but my peripheral vision remained fixed on her bowl. After she finished her porridge, she let out a satisfied sigh. My phone rang. It was a message from Tang Chen. "Congratulations, congratulations. Happy wedding. Are you up yet? Did you sleep well last night? How is Miss Pia's mood? What are you having for breakfast?" I didn't reply to any of them. The next message followed immediately after. "By the way, Mr. Jiang, you have another show in Shenzhen next Wednesday. Ms. Pia booked your schedule for 3 years before. Now that you two are married, do we need to adjust this show schedule?" I handed the phone to Pei Yanran. "You booked my shows for 3 years. What do we do now?" She looked at the message and smiled. "Can you refund a show your wife bought for you?" I felt helpless. "So I've basically been kept by you like this?" She looked up at me with a hint of playfulness in her eyes. "At the beginning I spent 5.2 million to have you play Old Dream once. Now I've booked you for 3 years. Would you say it is a good deal or not? How many shows are there in total over 3 years?" She did the math. "Probably over 40 shows. On average, that is less than 150,000. Per s. How your value has gone up, but I bought at the super early bird rate." "When did you learn all this business talk?" "I learned how to manage a company in the UK. I have to know how to balance the books." She paused, her tone softening. "But I carefully selected all of those shows. Every single venue, every set list, and every seating layout I've personally reviewed." "You reviewed them?" "Yeah, when I was in the UK. Before every single show, I would receive a venue report. Only after confirming the lighting, sound, and safety measures were all in place would I sign off on it." She looked at me, her voice softening further. "I couldn't be on stage with you, but I could make sure that when you did go on stage, everything was perfect. Over 40 shows in 3 years. I thought it was just good luck. Turns out, behind every show there was someone checking every single light cable for me, and every speaker screw. Then why didn't you come see me back then?" She reached out and gently touched my face. "My mother didn't know you well back then. One of her conditions for investing in the Jiang family was that I couldn't see you." My heart ached as I pulled her into a tight embrace. Just then, another message from Tang Chu popped up. "Mr. Jiang, please reply to me. Don't get too lost in marital bliss. Just tell me if we're doing the Shenzhen show or not." Pei Yanran took my phone and sent a voice message directly. "The Shenzhen show is on as scheduled. Also, starting next month, all performance contracts will be transferred to us as a couple. Jiang Chen's performance fee remains unchanged, but the PA Corporation will no longer handle negotiations separately. Contracts will be signed directly with Jiang Chen's studio." Tang Chu replied instantly. "Understood. You are brilliant, Ms. Pei. Then, I won't disturb you two newlyweds." Pei Yanran hands my phone back to me, a smirk playing on her lips. "Your assistant is quite amusing. He just talks too much, but he is actually very reliable." "I know. Otherwise I wouldn't have let him stay by your side." "You put Tang Chu there?" She didn't answer directly, only saying, "Do you really think a regular music school graduate could go from playing in little bars to the international stage all on his own?" So that was it. She was the one behind every stroke of good luck I had. "Let's go. I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" "The orphanage." At the orphanage entrance, a little girl with pigtails, "The lady is here," was the first to run over. She hugged Pei Yanran's leg, then saw me, her eyes widening. "Who is this Mr. Ma'am?" Pei Yanran knelt down and patted her head. "He is my husband." The little girl looked even more surprised. "Husband means you got married?" "Yeah, we're married." The little girl looked at Pei Yanran, then at me, and tilted her head. "But why is your hair white, ma'am?" Pei Yanran froze for a second standing beside her. My heart wrenched her. She smiled and replied, because I waited so long for someone. My hair turned white from waiting. The little girl said earnestly, then you don't have to wait anymore. He is right here by your side now. Will your hair turn black again? It will. He said he would help me dye it back. Then you must look really beautiful after it is dyed. I knelt down to look the little girl in the eye. She definitely will, because she is already very beautiful. The little girl giggled, running off to announce it to the other children. She is married. Her husband is really handsome. The courtyard instantly erupted with excitement. The kids gathered around, chiming in with questions. What do you do? Can you play the flute? Can you teach us how to play? Pei Yanran stood to the side watching. She smiled so warmly that her eyes crinkled up. In the afternoon, after the children fell asleep, Pei Yanran and I sat on the swing in the yard. It hadn't been this quiet in a very long time. During those 5 years in the UK, I was busy every single day, dealing with the board of directors, coordinating performances, and checking your messages every day. I turned my head to look at her. You don't have to check them anymore. I'm right here beside you. She closed her eyes briefly. Yeah. It is a habit. It'll take some time to change. Then take your time. There is no rush. Oh right. There is one more thing I haven't told you. What is that? I've been sponsoring this orphanage all along. Not in the name of the Pei Corporation, but in my own personal name. A sum of money every month, along with supplies, clothes, and books. When I was in the UK I couldn't come in person, but the money never stopped. These children, just like you, are people whose fates were decided by their families. I didn't want them to be like you, waiting 5 years just to get an outcome. I looked at her profile. Even in her own suffering, this woman is trying to shield others from pain. Right at that moment, the sound of footsteps came from the entrance of the yard. I looked up. Xu Jingyun was standing at the entrance. She was holding a bag of toys in her hand, an awkward smile on her face. I'm here to do some charity work. She looked at Pei Yanran, and then at me, trying hard to sound natural. I heard they need supplies here. I brought some over. Pei Yanran stood up, her expression calm, but her eyes grew a degree colder. Miss Xu, here to do charity? Yeah. The business with Pei Entertainment. I've already cut ties with them. I also released a statement. I have absolutely nothing to do with Pei Jingyang anymore. I'm really sorry about what happened with Mr. Jiang before. You don't need to come in person to do charity, Miss Xu. A wire transfer would do. Did you come in person because you wanted me to see your sincerity? Or because you wanted Jiang Chen to see it? I didn't press the matter of those cufflinks. And the issue of you teaming up with Pei Jingyang. I've already dealt with it. I also saw the statement you released. But doing charity isn't a PR stunt, Miss Xu. Standing here with a bag of toys. This isn't kindness. It is a performance. Xu Jingyun bit her lip and tightened her grip on the bag in her hand. Pei Yanran looked at her for a couple of seconds before turning around to sit back down on the swing. You can leave the things. But you don't need to come in person next time. Xu Jingyun stood at the gate, her face flushing red then turning pale. Seeing that I remained silent, she set the things down and turned to leave. She walked twice as fast as when she had arrived. The courtyard fell quiet again. Pei Yanran's tone returned to its usual composure. She won't be coming back a second time. What you just said was even harsher than what you said at the board meeting. The board meeting was a battle. This is clearing the battlefield. You clear the battlefield pretty efficiently too. I have to. If the battlefield isn't completely cleared, someone will always think they still have a chance. She doesn't stand a chance anymore, not because of what you said, but because I chose you. She looked at me, her eyes softening for a brief moment. Yeah, I know. But I couldn't keep from smiling. On the drive back, Fiona suddenly frowned. I immediately looked over. What is wrong? She pressed her hand to her stomach. My stomach feels a bit upset. It is fine. I just had too much sweet stuff today. What sweet stuff? I grew tense. Kanji isn't sweet, is it? She glanced at me. It is not the kanji. It is you. You're so sweet, it is upsetting my stomach. Her words caught me completely off guard. My heart skipped a beat, and then I laughed. Fiona, when did you learn how to flirt? She closed her eyes and said, when I was bored in the UK. I practiced by myself. I didn't reply, but reached over to gently rub her stomach. My movements were gentle, afraid of hurting her old ailment. A bit lighter. I eased up on the pressure. When will your stomach issues be completely cured? She didn't give a direct answer, only saying, it is already much better than last year. Last year, I'd throw up even after a single bite of bread. Being able to drink a bowl of kanji now is progress. Last year, I'd throw up even after a single bite of bread. My heart ached at those words. What kind of life must that have been? She was all alone in the UK, managing the company to pave the way for me on one hand, while fighting anorexia on the other. I didn't dare ask any more questions, and just kept rubbing her stomach, my movements even gentler than before. She gradually relaxed, her breathing turning steady. Thank you, Ethan. No need to thank me. This is what a husband is supposed to do. The corners of her mouth curved up again. You've gotten pretty smooth with those words. Learned it from you. By the time we got back to the apartment, it was already evening. She went to the bedroom to change her clothes. I sat in the living room. Tang Chu sent another message. Mr. Jiang, regarding the Shenzhen event next Wednesday, the venue has confirmed everything. The lighting and sound systems are all set. As for the one signed by Pei Yanran, I also reviewed the venue report. Every single item is marked with red notes. Even the slope of the audience seating was verified. That woman really has it bad for you. I texted Tang Chu back with just 2 words. Shut up. I hit send on shut up. Tang Chu replied instantly. Got it. I put down my phone and walked over to the bedroom door. The door was open. Her back was turned to me, revealing a sliver of her waist. She looked incredibly thin. So thin it made my heart ache. Suddenly, I noticed on her lower back there was a tiny scar. I didn't recall ever seeing it before. She turned around, realizing my gaze was fixed on her waist. An old injury. She reached down and pulled her t-shirt down slightly. On our wedding day when the stage collapsed, I threw myself over to protect you and got scratched by a piece of splintered wood. I walked over and gently lifted a corner of her t-shirt. The scar wasn't big, but it was jagged and irregular. My fingers brushed against it, and she shuddered slightly. So this is from when you protected me? Yeah. From now on things like this won't happen again. I won't let you get hurt for me ever again. She looked at me, her eyes growing slightly red, and reached out to touch my face. Okay. She rummaged through the closet and pulled out an old notebook. Its cover yellowed and the corners worn down. She hesitated for a moment before handing it to me. You might want to read this. I took it and opened it. The date was the 9th of June, 5 years ago, the day after she was sent away on the plane. It read, "Where is Chen today? He should still be in the hospital. Is he awake yet? Does he remember me?" I turned to the second page. The 10th of June. He has been discharged. Tang Chu said he is resting at home. He didn't mention me. He really forgot. I kept flipping through the pages. The format on every page was the same. The date. Where is Chen today? What did he do? And what did he do? How is he doing? How is he doing so early in the morning? Later on, the entries gradually changed. They started including information about my performances. He played Old Dream at the Musikverein in Vienna. I listened to it 3 times in my London apartment. He held a recital in Berlin. The program included Claire de Lune. Claire de Lune is my favorite. He won the gold prize at the Paris Music Festival. The path I paved for him has finally led there. I turned to the last few pages. The handwriting grew faster and increasingly scribbled, as if she were writing in a rush. The last page was dated last month. There was only a single line on it. He finally played Old Dream in front of me. He is finally back. I closed the notebook, a tight lump forming in my throat. 5 years. Every single day, every single night, she was looking for me. I set the notebook down and looked at her. You wrote in it every single day. She nodded. It became a habit, and it was the only thing I could do. I walked over and pulled her into my arms. You don't have to write anymore. Starting today, I'll always be by your side. I know. But I won't throw the notebook away. She had kept watch for me for 5 years with it. I had to keep it. Keep it. I want to read every single page. She smiled faintly. You finished reading it now. There is still 1 page you haven't seen. I was taken aback. There is more? From the inside cover of the notebook, she pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded multiple times. I've been writing this letter for 5 years, adding a paragraph each year, but I never finished writing the last paragraph. I looked down at the first paragraph. Ah, Chen, if forgetting me makes you happy, then forget me. I don't want you to suffer because of me. The second paragraph. Ah, Chen, if you ever remember me, come find me. I'm in Beijing, at Pei's Entertainment, at the orphanage, anywhere you can see me. The third paragraph. Ah Chen, if you hate me, I'll accept that too. At least hate is better than being forgotten. Hate at least means you still remember me. The space for the last paragraph was blank. For the last paragraph, I wanted to write, if you come back, then never leave again. But I never dared to write it, because I wasn't sure if you would ever come back. Looking at the hesitation in her eyes, I wrote a line in that final blank space. I'm back. And I'm never leaving again. Her tears finally fell, not from sadness, but from relief. She was finally letting go of all the anxiety from the past 5 years. Ah Chen, now that you've written it, don't you dare erase it. I won't erase it. If I erase anything, I'll make it up to you. You can't make up for tears. That price is way too high. I pulled her into my arms. Then don't let me erase it. She wrapped her arms back around me. Okay. Outside the window, the sky grew dark, but the lights inside the room were bright. Under the light, her white hair looked like moonlight resting on her shoulders. I looked at her and thought, whether it is white hair, black hair, her scars, her diary, or that unfinished letter, they are all proof that she was waiting for me. And now I finally have the right to turn this proof into memories with my own hands. When we returned to the living room, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Tang Chu. Mr. Jiang, Pei Jingsing's company liquidation is complete, but there is still an offshore account under his name that we haven't traced. The destination of the last transfer was Beijing, but we haven't identified the recipient. The amount is just enough to register a new company. I stared at the message, my brow furrowing slightly. Pei Jingxing still has a card up his sleeve. Noticing my expression, Pei Yanran asked, "What is wrong?" Pei Jingxing might not be completely out of the game yet. I handed her the phone. She glanced at the message, the corner of her mouth twitching slightly. "Then let him come." She leaned against my shoulder, her tone nonchalant. "Anyway now. I have you by my side," but her fingers tightened around my sleeve again, unwilling to let go. As for Pei Jinghang's overseas transfer, Ji Qinghuan tracked it down 3 days later. The recipient was a shell company, but Pei Yanran was one step ahead of her. The day before the transfer was completed, she had already had her lawyer freeze that account before Pei Jingyang could even draw his last blade. It was confiscated. Xu Jingyun withdrew from all social circles related to me. I didn't wear the cufflinks, but I didn't throw them away either. When Pei Yanran saw that velvet box, she only said one thing: keep them for future use. Consider it her final gesture of goodwill toward you. You don't even mind the thing she gave me anymore? She smiled slightly. Stepping on the flowers back then was about competing. There is no need to compete anymore. You're already my husband. What is there to compete for? A month later, Tang Chu finally learned the whole truth. Upon learning the truth, he said in shock, "So my promotions and raises over the last 5 years were also approved by the eldest Miss Pei." I couldn't help but laugh. You finally know who your real boss is. 6 months later, Pei Yanran went for a comprehensive physical exam. Her condition was much better than before. As long as she maintained this state, she would be fine. She looked very calm when she came back with the report, but I still saw her secretly breathe a sigh of relief. On the day Pei's mother arrived in Beijing, Pei Yanran personally went to the airport to pick her up. 5 years ago, she had personally sent her daughter onto the plane. 5 years later, she flew over and stood at the exit. Seeing her daughter, her eyes welled with tears. "Yanran, what I owe you is more than just an apology." Her mother reached out her hand. Pei Yanran hesitated for a couple of seconds, and then took it. In the evening we sat on the balcony. She was holding that old notebook in her hands. The line I wrote on the very last page was still there. "I'm back, and I'm never leaving again." She turned to this page, her finger pausing for a moment, and then she smiled. "Your handwriting is really awful." The sound of a bamboo flute drifted from afar. It was the speaker I had left on. 3 months later, Pei Yanran's white hair began to turn black again. Her mother invited me to their home for dinner for the first time. During the meal, she said, "This boy will be half a member of the PA family from now on." Pei Yanran was taken aback. I chimed in, "Actually, ma'am, it is me. I'm fully a member of the PA family now." I thought back to the day I proposed. That day, I finished playing her favorite piece, Moonlight, on the flute. The lights and flowers were just like 5 years ago, except this time I was the one proposing. Pei Yanran came up to the stage to hand me flowers. I didn't take them. Instead, I went down on one knee. "5 years ago you protected me. From now on, now it is my turn to protect you. Yanran, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in her eyes. She kept nodding, then bent down and kissed me.